Imagine waking up one morning to find your only child, the daughter you raised alone after your wife's death, publicly disowning you on social media. 500 strangers applauding as she cuts you out of her life forever. No explanation, no warning. Just public execution of your fatherhood with the click of a button. That was my reality. After 42 years of bedtime stories, college tuition payments, and unconditional love, my daughter Kendra declared me dead to her. What could drive a child to such cruelty? What secrets had my late wife kept that were now being weaponized against me? And why was my sister-in-law Ruth smiling in her car outside my lawyer's office after I removed Kendra from my $3 million will? The truth would shatter everything I thought I knew about family, biology, and what it truly means to be a father. Follow along as I reveal how one DNA test, a hidden journal, and a nurse's unexpected kindness helped me discover that sometimes the deepest betrayals can lead to the most profound healing. If you've ever felt the sting of family rejection, or wondered if love can survive devastating secrets, this story is for you. Follow the channel, like this video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I never thought I'd see the day when my own flesh and blood would publicly disown me. Yet there I was, sitting on the porch of the house I'd called home for 42 years, the same wooden rocking chair creaking beneath me as it had for decades. The morning had started like any other. Birds chirping, coffee steaming in my favorite mug, the gentle breeze carrying the scent of Mrs. Henderson's roses from next door. On the wall beside me hung Caroline's portrait. My late wife's smile still had that same effect on me, even after all these years. Those knowing eyes silently urging patience, as if she could see what was coming before I did. God, I miss her wisdom now more than ever. The notification sound from my phone barely registered at first. Kendra, my only daughter, had started a live video. Nothing unusual there. She was always posting those inspirational talks and wellness routines. I clicked on it, expecting to see her demonstrating some new yoga pose or sharing another green smoothie recipe. What I saw instead froze the blood in my veins. There she was, my beautiful girl, her face blotchy and eyes swollen red. Mascara trails mapped her cheeks like tiny rivers of pain. Her voice, the same voice that once called me daddy and asked for bedtime stories, trembled as she looked directly into the camera. "Today," she said, her voice breaking, "I'm cutting my father out of my life. Permanently." My heart stopped. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering on the porch floor. I barely noticed. "He never represented who I truly am," Kendra continued, wiping at her tears. "He never truly loved me. He was never a real father to me. I'm removing him from my life forever." I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't understand. The screen filled with hearts floating upward, hundreds then thousands of them. Comments poured in. "Stay strong, girl. You don't need that toxicity. So brave of you to share this." 500 likes and counting. 500 people applauding the assassination of my fatherhood. 500 strangers celebrating as my daughter drove a knife through my heart. What had I done to deserve this? I raised her alone after Caroline died when Kendra was only 12. I worked 2 jobs to put her through college. I was there for every heartbreak, every triumph. I cheered at her graduation. I helped her move into her first apartment. I held her hand through her first real breakup. How could all of that amount to nothing? The comments kept flowing. "Toxic dad alert. You're better off without him. Blood isn't always family." The worst part wasn't the humiliation. It was the confusion. The absolute devastating bewilderment of not knowing what I'd done to earn such hatred. My mind raced through every argument we'd ever had, every decision I'd made as her father. Nothing seemed to justify this public execution. I looked up from the screen, dazed, to find Mrs. Henderson peering over the fence. She quickly averted her eyes, but not before I caught the mixture of pity and morbid curiosity on her face. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Everyone would see this. My neighbors, our family friends, the men I played poker with on Thursdays, the ladies from Caroline's old book club who still invited me to their Christmas parties. In Kendra's digital courtroom, I'd been tried, convicted, and sentenced without ever knowing the charges against me. "Dad never supported me," Kendra was saying now, her voice growing stronger with each accusation. "He controlled everything. He suffocated Mom. He's the reason she was never truly happy." Those words, where had they come from? In 29 years, I'd never heard Kendra speak like this. These weren't her words. This wasn't my daughter. The live video ended abruptly, freezing on her tear-stained face before going dark. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own ragged breathing. The portrait of Caroline seemed to watch me with sadness now, rather than patience. I tried calling Kendra immediately, straight to voicemail. I texted, "Sweetheart, what's happening? Please talk to me." No response. I sat there as the sun climbed higher, as neighbors walked their dogs past my house, stealing glances at the old man whose daughter had just canceled him online. I sat there as the coffee dried on the porch boards. I sat there as the light shifted and Caroline's portrait fell into shadow. Something had poisoned my daughter against me. Someone had twisted her memories, warped her perception of our life together. And as I finally stood up, my knees cracking in protest, I knew with absolute certainty who that someone was. Ruth, Caroline's sister. The woman who had never forgiven me for marrying her precious little sister. The woman who, since Caroline's funeral, had been whispering in Kendra's ear, planting seeds of doubt and resentment. I walked inside, past the wall of photos chronicling Kendra's life. Her first steps, first day of school, high school graduation, college commencement, all moments when she had looked at me with love, not hatred. My phone buzzed again. Not Kendra. It was a text from Martin, my oldest friend and attorney. "Will, you need to call me. Just saw Kendra's video. We need to talk about the will." I looked at the message for a long moment, then set the phone down. A cold, unfamiliar resolve settled in my chest. If my daughter could so easily erase 42 years of love and sacrifice, perhaps I needed to make some erasures of my own. 2 months before Kendra's devastating live video, I should have seen the storm brewing on the horizon. The signs were there, subtle at first, like the way autumn whispers its arrival through a slight chill in the air before the leaves begin to fall. It was late March and spring was struggling to take hold in our little corner of Connecticut. I was tending to Caroline's garden, my fingers working the soil she once loved. Kendra had promised to visit for Sunday lunch, something we'd done religiously since she moved to her own place in New Haven, about 40 minutes away. But lately, those visits had grown shorter, the conversations more strained. When her blue Honda pulled into the driveway that afternoon, I noticed something different in her posture as she stepped out. A rigidity, a guardedness that hadn't been there before. She didn't rush to hug me as she usually did. Instead, she offered a tight smile and a brief nod. "The daffodils are coming up nicely," I said, gesturing to Caroline's flower beds. "Your mom always said they were the bravest flowers, pushing through the last of winter's cold." Kendra barely glanced at them. "They're just plants, Dad. They don't have feelings." The dismissiveness in her tone caught me off guard. Caroline had instilled in Kendra a love for gardening, for seeing life's lessons in nature's rhythms. This cynicism was new. Inside, I'd prepared her favorite meal, pot roast with those little red potatoes she'd loved since childhood. We sat across from each other at the oak dining table where we'd shared thousands of meals as a family. The empty chair at the end, Caroline's chair, seemed to watch us silently. "How's work going?" I asked, trying to bridge whatever invisible gap had formed between us. "Fine." One syllable, flat and final. "And that new project you mentioned last time? The marketing campaign for—" "It's fine, Dad, everything's fine." She pushed her food around her plate, barely eating. I set down my fork. "Kendra, is something bothering you? You seem different lately." She looked up then, and I saw something flash in her eyes, something hard and accusatory that made my stomach tighten. "You always controlled everything, didn't you?" The words came out of nowhere, sharp as broken glass. "What? What are you talking about?" "Our lives. Mom's life. You made all the decisions. You never let her be who she really wanted to be." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Kendra, your mother and I had a partnership. We made decisions together. That's not what Aunt Ruth says." Her voice had an edge I'd never heard before. And there it was. Ruth. My late wife's sister had always resented me, convinced I'd somehow stolen Caroline away from their close-knit family. After Caroline died from breast cancer 8 years ago, Ruth's thinly veiled hostility had blossomed into something more active, more poisonous. "Ruth has her own version of history," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. "But she wasn't in our marriage. She doesn't know." "She was Caroline's sister," Kendra interrupted. "She knew her better than anyone. Better than you, probably." The pot roast turned to ash in my mouth. These weren't my daughter's words. This wasn't how she'd ever spoken about her mother and me before. "Kendra," I said softly, What exactly has Ruth been telling you? She looked down at her plate, then back up at me with eyes suddenly glistening with tears. Aunt Ruth told me things you don't want me to know. My heart hammered against my ribs. What things? About Mom. About why she was really unhappy. About... She paused, seeming to struggle with whether to continue. About me. A chill ran through me then. A premonition of something terrible lurking just beyond my understanding. Whatever she's told you, Kendra, you should talk to me about it. I don't think I can trust what you'd say anymore. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. I need to go. Kendra, please, I'll call you later. But her tone suggested she had no intention of doing so. I followed her to the door, helpless, watching as my daughter, the little girl I'd raised, the young woman I'd devoted my life to, pulled away from me like I was a stranger or worse, an enemy. As she stormed out to her car, I noticed something fall from her purse, a white envelope that fluttered to the ground like a wounded bird. She didn't notice, slamming her car door and backing out of the driveway with a spray of gravel. I picked up the envelope. There was no name on it, but through the thin paper, I could make out the letterhead of Gentech Laboratories. My hand trembled as I held it, some instinct warning me that whatever was inside could change everything. But I didn't open it. Instead, I tucked it into the drawer of the hallway table, telling myself I'd give it back to her next time she visited. It wasn't my place to read her private correspondence, no matter how worried I was. That envelope sat in that drawer for weeks, a ticking time bomb I was too afraid to defuse. Now I know it contained a DNA test, the match that would eventually light the fuse on the explosion that destroyed everything I thought I knew about my family. If only I'd had the courage to open it then. If only I'd confronted whatever truth Ruth had twisted and wielded like a weapon against me. If only I'd recognized that silence and respect for privacy could sometimes be the wrong choice when someone you love is being poisoned against you. The warning signs were all there. I just chose to ignore them, hoping they'd disappear on their own. But some storms can't be waited out. Some truths demand to be faced head-on, no matter how painful they might be. And my failure to see that cost me the most precious thing in my life, my daughter's love and trust. The week after Kendra's devastating live video felt like moving through quicksand, each hour dragging me deeper into a suffocating darkness. Sleep became a distant memory. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying her words on an endless loop. He never truly loved me. I'm removing him from my life forever. During those sleepless nights, I'd often find myself wandering the empty hallways of our family home, touching photographs on the walls as if they were relics from a civilization long gone. In one, 5-year-old Kendra sat on my shoulders at Disney World, her tiny hands gripping my forehead, both of us laughing beneath the Florida sun. In another, I stood beside her at her high school graduation, my chest puffed with pride as she clutched her diploma. Had all those moments meant nothing to her? By the 4th day, the constant refreshing of my phone, hoping for a text, a call, any acknowledgement from my daughter, had left me hollow-eyed and haggard. The neighbors had stopped coming by, perhaps unsure what to say to the man whose family drama had become public spectacle. Only Mrs. Henderson still brought over casseroles, setting them on the porch with a gentle knock before retreating, sparing me the pain of conversation. It was on the 5th day, after yet another night without sleep, that something inside me shifted. The grief that had paralyzed me began to harden into something else, a cold, brittle anger that crackled like ice forming over a pond. If Kendra could so easily discard 42 years of love and sacrifice, perhaps it was time I acknowledged that painful reality. I showered for the first time in days, trimmed my beard, and put on a proper shirt and slacks instead of the bathrobe I'd been living in. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized the man staring back. Thinner, older, with a newfound hardness around the eyes. The drive to Martin Blake's law office took 20 minutes, through streets lined with autumn-touched trees that seemed to mock the spring with their dying beauty. I'd known Martin since college. He'd been best man at my wedding, godfather to Kendra, a steady presence through Caroline's illness and death. If anyone would understand what I was about to do, it would be him. His office sat above an antique store in the historic district, a place of polished wood and leather-bound books that smelled of tradition and stability. His secretary, Doris, who'd known me for decades, gave me a sympathetic smile as I passed. News travels fast in small towns. Martin stood as I entered, coming around his massive oak desk to embrace me. something he'd never done before in our professional interactions. That simple act of compassion nearly broke me, but I steeled myself. I wasn't here for comfort. I was here for justice. "You've seen it then," I said, not needing to specify what it was. He nodded, gesturing for me to sit. "Will, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine what you're going through." I lowered myself into the leather chair opposite his desk, the material creaking beneath me like an old ship in a storm. From my jacket pocket, I withdrew the document that had brought me here. My last will and testament, drafted 5 years earlier after Caroline's death. "I want to change this," I said, placing it on the desk between us, "and all of it." Martin's eyes, kind but shrewd behind his wire-rimmed glasses, studied me carefully. "Will, are you sure about this? Decisions made in moments of pain." "This isn't a moment, Martin. It's been 5 days. 5 days without a word from her. 5 days of watching strangers on the internet applaud my daughter for cutting me out of her life." My voice remained steady, but my hands betrayed me, trembling slightly as they rested on the arms of the chair. "She made her choice. Now I'm making mine." He sighed deeply, reaching for the document with reluctance. "You have $3 million in assets, Will. The house, your retirement accounts, Caroline's life insurance, the investments that performed well over the years. It's a substantial estate. And Kendra is your only heir." "Not anymore." The words felt strange on my tongue, both bitter and liberating. "I want to leave everything to Emily Nielsen." Martin's eyebrows shot up. "The nurse? From Oakwood Retirement Community?" I nodded. For the past 2 years I'd been volunteering at Oakwood, reading to residents with failing eyesight. Emily was a young nurse there, 28, kind, hardworking, putting herself through advanced nursing school while caring for her ailing mother. She'd always taken time to talk with me, to ask about my day, to listen when memories of Caroline became too heavy to bear alone. She's never asked me for anything, Martin, never expected anything. She just sees me as a person, not an obligation or a burden or a villain in someone else's story. Martin removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You're aware how this will look? People will talk. They'll assume. Let them. I've already been tried and convicted in the court of public opinion. What's one more accusation?" The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. "Will..." Martin leaned forward, his voice dropping to that gentle tone people use with the bereaved or mentally unstable. "Have you tried calling Kendra? Maybe this is all a misunderstanding. 17 calls, 23 text messages, 2 emails. I even drove to her apartment yesterday. Her roommate said she wasn't there, but I heard her voice inside. The memory of standing on that doorstep, knowing my daughter was hiding from me, sent a fresh wave of pain through my chest. She's made her position clear." Martin held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "I'll draft the new will, but I'm putting a 6-month delay clause in it. If you change your mind within 6 months, we can revert to the original terms without filing new paperwork." "Fine." I didn't argue. Deep down, some small part of me still hoped for reconciliation, though I'd never admit it aloud. It took an hour to finalize everything. Signatures, witnesses, notarization. With each stroke of the pen, I felt something inside me break and reset, like a bone being properly aligned after a bad fracture. By the time I stood to leave, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across Martin's office. "Take care of yourself, Will," Martin said as he walked me to the door. "And remember, you can call me anytime, not just as your attorney." I thanked him with a nod, too emotionally drained for more words. As I walked to my car in the parking lot behind the building, movement caught my eye. A silver Lexus was parked in the far corner, partly hidden by a large oak tree. Behind the wheel sat Ruth, Caroline's sister, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read from that distance. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. Instead, she smiled, a slow, satisfied curl of the lips that contained no warmth, only triumph. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity. She'd orchestrated all of this. Whatever she'd told Kendra, whatever lies she'd spun, they had been designed for exactly this outcome, to break the bond between father and daughter. And now, seeing me emerging from my lawyer's office, disheveled and broken, she believed she'd won. Perhaps she had. But as I drove home to my empty house, I realized that in family wars, there are never any true victors, only casualties. A week after changing my will, the silence from Kendra had become a physical presence in our house, an invisible wall that seemed to block out light and air. Each morning I'd wake with that brief, merciful moment of forgetfulness before reality crashed back, bringing with it the dull ache of betrayal that had become my constant companion. That particular Tuesday dawned gray and drizzly, the kind of autumn day Caroline had always loved. Perfect reading weather, she'd call it, curling up with a novel and a cup of tea by the bay window. The memory of her there, blanket tucked around her legs, reading glasses perched on her nose, hit me with unexpected force. I needed to feel close to her. Our basement had become something of a memorial to the life we'd built. Boxes of photographs, holiday decorations we'd collected over decades, Kendra's childhood artwork and school projects I couldn't bear to throw away. I descended the creaking wooden stairs, flicking on the single bulb that cast long shadows across the concrete floor. In the far corner sat a cedar chest Caroline had inherited from her grandmother. I knelt before it, ignoring the protest of my aging knees, and lifted the heavy lid. The scent that escaped, a mixture of lavender sachet and old paper, was so distinctly Caroline that for a moment, I could almost feel her presence beside me. Inside lay carefully preserved remnants of our life together. Her wedding veil, yellowed with age but still delicate as spun sugar, the hospital bracelet from when Kendra was born, ticket stubs from concerts and shows we'd attended, and beneath it all, a blue leather-bound book I hadn't seen in years, Caroline's journal. My fingers trembled as I lifted it. The cover was soft from years of handling. Her initials, CEM, embossed in faded gold in the bottom right corner. Caroline Elizabeth Montgomery, the name she'd had before becoming Caroline Ellis. My wife, my partner, my best friend. Opening it felt like trespassing, even after all these years. Caroline had always been private about her writing, though she'd never explicitly forbidden me from reading it. In the raw aftermath of her death, I couldn't bear to look at it, let alone read her most intimate thoughts. But now, with our daughter turned against me, I desperately needed Caroline's wisdom. The journal fell open naturally to the final entries, written during her last months at Hartford Memorial, when the cancer had spread too far, too fast. Her normally elegant handwriting had grown shaky, the letters uneven, betraying her weakening condition. I traced them with my fingertip, a physical connection to the last words she'd written. Most entries were brief reflections, observations about her nurses, notes about Kendra's visits, worries about how we would manage without her. But the final page, dated just 3 days before she died, contained something different. If something happens to me, Will needs to speak with Pastor Miller. He knows the truth about Kendra. I should have told Will years ago, but I was afraid. Now I'm more afraid of leaving this world with secrets between us. Pastor Miller promised to help. He'll know what to do. My heart hammered against my ribs. The truth about Kendra? What truth? Caroline and I had never kept secrets, or so I'd believed. I read the words again and again, as if repetition might squeeze more meaning from them. Pastor James Miller had been our minister for over 20 years at First Presbyterian. He'd married us, baptized Kendra, counseled us through rough patches, and ultimately delivered Caroline's eulogy. Now in his 70s, he'd retired from full-time ministry, but still lived in the small house behind the church. I closed the journal and held it against my chest, feeling as if I were holding Caroline herself. Whatever secret she'd kept, whatever truth she'd entrusted to Pastor Miller instead of me, I needed to know it now. The rain had intensified by the time I arrived at First Presbyterian, a Gothic revival building of weathered stone that had stood at the center of our town since 1872. I parked near the side entrance that led to the pastor's residence, my windshield wipers beating a frantic rhythm against the downpour. Pastor Miller answered on the third knock, his tall frame stooped now with age, white hair thinned to reveal spotted scalp. Recognition, followed by something like apprehension, crossed his lined face. "William," he said, my full name sounding formal and strange. "I've been expecting you, though I confess I thought you might come sooner." "Sooner?" I echoed, rain dripping from my jacket onto his welcome mat. He nodded slowly. After Kendra's public statement, come in out of the rain. His living room was modest but comfortable, bookshelves lining the walls, a worn leather armchair positioned near a reading lamp, family photos arranged on the mantel above a fireplace where a small blaze crackled. He gestured for me to sit on the sofa, while he lowered himself carefully into the armchair. "I found Caroline's journal," I said without preamble. "Her last entry mentioned you, said you knew the truth about Kendra." "And what truth, Pastor?" What didn't my wife tell me? Pastor Miller sighed deeply, looking suddenly every one of his 70-plus years. Caroline came to me the week before she passed. She was struggling with something she'd kept hidden for many years. Something involving her sister, Ruth. My stomach tightened at the mention of Ruth's name. She asked me to hold this for you, he continued, rising with effort and moving to a small secretary desk in the corner. From a locked drawer, he withdrew an envelope, faded with age. She said you'd come asking one day when the time was right. I think that time is now. The envelope he placed in my hands bore my name in Caroline's handwriting. Unlike the journal entries, this was written in her strong, confident script. Written, I realized, before the cancer had weakened her. She made me promise not to give this to you unless you asked specifically about Kendra, Pastor Miller explained. She wanted to tell you herself, but in the end, she ran out of time. I finished for him, staring at the sealed envelope. Yes. He laid a weathered hand on my shoulder. Whatever you discover, William, remember that Caroline loved you completely. Some secrets are kept not out of deception, but out of fear of losing what we cherish most. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and withdrew a single sheet of paper. As I read Caroline's final confession, the truth she'd carried alone for decades, tears blurred my vision. Turning her words into watery smudges, I had to blink clear to comprehend. The letter detailed how Ruth had threatened Caroline for years, how she'd whispered poisonous half-truths to Kendra from the time she was small, subtle undermining that Caroline had tried to counter without revealing the full, ugly story. How Ruth had promised that if Caroline ever told me the complete truth, she would make sure Kendra turned against me completely. The letter ended with words that burned into my soul. If you're reading this, Will, it means I'm gone, and Ruth has finally succeeded in turning our daughter against you. Fight for her, my love. Fight for the truth. Fight for the family we built together. Because family isn't always about blood, but about the love we choose to give. Family isn't always about blood. The phrase echoed in my mind as I refolded the letter, my thoughts racing toward the white envelope I'd found outside my house, the one that had fallen from Kendra's purse, the one I still hadn't opened. I thanked Pastor Miller, declining his offer of tea and further conversation. I needed to get home. I needed to open that envelope. I needed to finally face whatever truth Caroline had tried to protect me from, the truth that Ruth had weaponized against our family. Wednesdays had always been structure in my increasingly shapeless life, the day I volunteered at Oakwood Retirement Community. Even in the chaos following Kendra's public denunciation, I couldn't bring myself to break this routine. There was something grounding about reading to Mr. Peterson, whose macular degeneration had stolen his ability to enjoy the spy novels he loved, or helping Mrs. Abernathy write letters to grandchildren scattered across the country. But this particular Wednesday, I couldn't focus. Caroline's letter from Pastor Miller burned in my pocket like a hot coal. I'd spent the previous night reading and rereading it, trying to reconcile the loving wife I thought I knew with a woman who had kept such significant secrets. I still hadn't found the courage to open the envelope from Kendra's purse, the DNA test that might confirm what Caroline's letter had hinted at. The retirement home's corridors seemed longer than usual, the fluorescent lighting harsher. The familiar scent of industrial cleaner mingled with cafeteria food couldn't mask an underlying smell I'd always associated with these places, the subtle, inescapable scent of time running out. Mr. Ellis, are you all right? I turned to find Emily Nielsen watching me with concern in her green eyes. At 28, Emily stood out among the staff at Oakwood, not just for her youth, but for the genuine compassion she showed each resident. Today, her strawberry blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, dark circles under her eyes suggesting long hours and little rest. Just a bit distracted, I admitted, attempting a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. Didn't sleep well. I heard about what happened. Her voice dropped to ensure privacy in the busy hallway. With your daughter's social media post, I'm so sorry. Of course she knew. Everyone probably knew. My humiliation wasn't just local news anymore. It had spread through the invisible networks that connected people in the digital age. Thank you, I managed, embarrassment heating my face. But I'll be fine. Emily glanced at her watch, then made a decision. My break starts in 5 minutes. Would you like some coffee? The staff lounge has the good stuff, not that brown water they serve in the dining room. I accepted, more to avoid returning to my empty house than from any desire for caffeine. The staff lounge was mercifully empty, A small room with mismatched furniture, a coffee station, and a mini fridge humming in the corner. Emily prepared 2 cups, adding cream to mine without asking. She'd noticed how I took my coffee over the many Wednesdays we'd exchanged pleasantries. "I make these every week," she said, placing a small paper bag on the table between us. "Apple cinnamon muffins, my grandmother's recipe." The simple kindness, so unexpected, so undeserved, threatened to unravel me. I accepted a muffin, but couldn't bring myself to eat it, turning the warm pastry in my hands instead. "My mother loved to bake," I said, the memories surfacing unbidden. "Kendra used to stand on a stool beside her, helping by eating half the chocolate chips before they made it into the cookies." Emily smiled, settling into the chair across from me. "You must have wonderful memories of raising her." I thought I did. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. Now I'm not sure what was real and what wasn't. "What do you mean?" Perhaps it was exhaustion, or the genuine concern in her eyes, or simply the need to unburden myself to someone who hadn't already taken sides. But I found myself telling Emily everything. Caroline's mysterious letter, Ruth's apparent manipulation, the unopened DNA test, the changed will. She listened without interruption, her coffee growing cold between her palms. "I just don't understand," I concluded, running a hand over my face. "How could Kendra believe the worst about me so easily? After everything we've been through together?" Emily considered this, her expression thoughtful. "When my dad left us, I was 12. He told me it was because my mom was impossible to live with. For years I believed him. I was angry at my mom for driving him away." She paused, twisting a paper napkin between her fingers. "It wasn't until I was in nursing school that I learned the truth. He'd been having affairs our entire marriage. But by then I'd spent a decade being cold to my mother, blaming her for something that was never her fault." "What changed?" I asked. "How did you find out the truth?" "His new wife called me, drunk, wanting to clear her conscience." Emily's smile was sad. "The point is, when someone you trust tells you something about someone else you love, especially when you're young or vulnerable, it can rewire your entire understanding of your life. Your daughter might be trapped in a version of reality that Ruth has carefully constructed." I nodded slowly, absorbing her insight. We sat in comfortable silence until her break timer chimed. As she stood to return to her duties, she hesitated, then spoke with uncharacteristic urgency. "Mr. Ellis, there's something I need to tell you. I wasn't sure if I should, but after everything you've shared," my heart skipped, sensing whatever came next would be significant. "Your daughter came to see me yesterday." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "Kendra? Here? Why?" Emily lowered her voice further, though we were still alone. "She was looking for you, actually. When they told her at the front desk that you only volunteer on Wednesdays, she asked to speak with me instead. She said she'd seen my name in your contacts when she used your phone once." My mind raced, trying to process this information. What did she want? She seemed scared, confused. Emily's brow furrowed at the memory. "She said she's been staying with her Aunt Ruth, but that things aren't right there. She said Ruth gets angry when she talks about contacting you, that she's been telling her strange things about your past, things that don't match Kendra's own memories." Hope fluttered in my chest like a trapped bird. "Did she say she wanted to see me?" "Not exactly. She asked questions. If you seemed okay, if you'd mentioned her, if you were angry." Emily twisted her hands together. "I told her you were heartbroken, not angry, that you missed her. That's when she started crying and asked for paper to write something." From the pocket of her scrubs, Emily withdrew a folded note. "She asked me to give this to you today. She made me promise not to tell Ruth she'd been here." The paper trembled in my hand, a simple white sheet torn from a notepad, folded twice. On it, in Kendra's familiar handwriting, was a single line. "Aunt Ruth lied. I need to know the truth. Do you still love me?" The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Of course I still loved her. I had never stopped, not for a single moment, not even when changing my will in that dark hour of betrayal and grief. "There's one more thing," Emily said, her voice gentle. "When she was leaving, she mentioned something about a DNA test. She said Ruth had convinced her to take it, but now she wasn't sure why, or what it really meant. She seemed confused about the results. The envelope, the one still sitting in my drawer at home unopened. Whatever truth it contained had been twisted by Ruth, used as a weapon to separate me from my daughter. "Thank you," I whispered, clutching Kendra's note like a lifeline. "Thank you for telling me." for giving me this." Emily squeezed my shoulder briefly before leaving for her shift. I remained in the empty lounge, reading those 9 words over and over, each repetition rebuilding a small piece of my shattered heart. My daughter hadn't abandoned me completely. Somewhere beneath the anger and confusion Ruth had cultivated, Kendra still loved me enough to reach out, to question, to seek the truth. It was time to open that envelope. Time to face whatever reality awaited inside. Time to fight for my daughter, just as Caroline had asked in her final letter. Because if there was even the smallest chance of reconciliation, I would move heaven and earth to make it happen. The drive home from Oakwood felt both eternal and instantaneous, my mind caught in a strange limbo of fear and hope. Kendra's note burned in my pocket, her words, "Do you still love me?" echoing in my thoughts with each turn of the steering wheel. How could she even question it? My love for her was as fundamental as breathing, as constant as gravity. Outside, the October evening had turned the world a burnished gold, sunlight filtering through flame-colored leaves in that particular autumn glow that Caroline had always called the hour of forgiveness. She claimed there was something about that specific light that made everything and everyone look worthy of second chances. I needed that forgiveness now, for not seeing what Ruth was doing sooner, for changing my will in a moment of wounded pride, for whatever truth awaited me in that envelope. My house stood silent as I pulled into the driveway, windows reflecting the sunset like squares of fire. Inside, everything remained exactly as I'd left it that morning. Coffee mug in the sink, Caroline's Afghan folded on the couch, reading glasses on the side table. The ordinary detritus of a solitary life that had once seemed unbearably empty, but now felt like a sanctuary from the chaos of recent days. I moved mechanically through the familiar ritual of homecoming. Keys in the ceramic bowl Caroline had made in a pottery class, jacket on the hook by the door, mail sorted on the counter. Normal actions anchoring me before I faced what might be the least normal moment of my life. The envelope waited in the drawer of the hall table where I'd placed it weeks ago, innocuous in its plain white simplicity. Gentech Laboratories was printed in the upper left corner, along with a return address in Hartford. I carried it to the kitchen table, set it down, and simply stared at it for what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes. What truth could be so devastating that Caroline had hidden it from me for decades? What could be so powerful that Ruth had weaponized it to destroy our family? Part of me wanted to burn the envelope unopened, to reject whatever reality it contained in favor of the life and memories I'd believed were true. But Kendra deserved better. I deserved better. Even Caroline, for all her secrets, deserved to have the full truth known at last. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and withdrew several folded papers filled with technical jargon and scientific terminology. At the top, paternity test results, in bold black letters that seemed to pulsate on the page. My eyes skimmed past paragraphs about methodology and reliability, seeking the bottom line. There it was, in clinical, dispassionate language. Probability of paternity, 0%. The alleged father is excluded as the biological father of the tested child. This conclusion is based on the non-matching alleles observed at the analyzed genetic loci. The room tilted sideways. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself, blood rushing in my ears like the ocean during a storm. Kendra, my beautiful, headstrong daughter who had my mother's chin and my father's laugh, was not biologically mine. Years of memories flashed through my mind like a film on fast forward. Holding her seconds after birth, her tiny fingers clutching my thumb, teaching her to ride a bike on our driveway, my hand steady on the seat until the moment I let go, walking her down the aisle at a mock wedding when she was 7, a pillowcase veil trailing behind her as she giggled and promised to love Daddy forever. Had Caroline betrayed me? Had our entire marriage been built on deception? The possibility felt like acid in my throat, burning away 30 years of trust and love. With shaking hands, I turned to the next page of the report, searching for answers. There, in the detailed genetic analysis, were more clinical terms I barely understood. But one phrase leapt from the page. Non-paternity event most likely occurred prior to conception. Prior to conception. Not an affair then. Something else. The final page of the report provided context I hadn't expected. A brief medical history Caroline had apparently submitted with the test. There, in matter-of-fact language, was the answer. Caroline and I had struggled with infertility for years before Kendra. After multiple miscarriages and failed treatments, we had explored other options. The report referenced donor conception and included a code number rather than a name. A sperm donor. That was the great secret. But that made no sense. Caroline and I had discussed adoption. Yes, but we'd never gone through with donor conception. I would have remembered signing consent forms, selecting donor profiles, the clinical procedures. Unless Caroline had done it without telling me. Unless she'd been so desperate for a child, so afraid of another loss, that she'd taken matters into her own hands. I sat back in my chair, the papers trembling in my grasp, trying to reconcile this new reality with the life I thought I'd lived. I remembered the joy on Caroline's face when she told me she was pregnant again, after years of disappointment, the cautious hope we'd allowed ourselves with each passing week. The miracle we'd both believed had finally happened. Had it all been a lie? No, not a lie. A different kind of truth. I remembered Caroline's letter, delivered by Pastor Miller. Family isn't always about blood, but about the love we choose to give. She'd known. Of course she'd known. She'd carried this secret alone, perhaps out of fear I'd reject both her and the child if I knew the truth. And somehow, Ruth had discovered it. Maybe Caroline had confided in her sister during a vulnerable moment, or perhaps Ruth had found medical records Caroline had hidden. Either way, Ruth had waited until Caroline was gone, until she could no longer defend her choices or explain her reasons, to use this truth as a weapon against me, to poison Kendra with the idea that her entire life had been built on deception. I gathered the papers, returned them to the envelope, and pressed it against my chest. Outside, darkness had fallen. The hour of forgiveness long past. But in my heart, something was shifting. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Caroline had wanted a child so desperately, had wanted to make me a father, that she'd taken an extraordinary risk. And in the end, did it matter how Kendra had come into our lives? I thought of all the nights spent rocking her through fevers, the school projects completed at the last minute, the driving lessons in empty parking lots, the college tuition payments that had stretched our budget to the breaking point. I thought of the fierce pride I'd felt at her graduations, the bone-deep worry when she'd had her appendix removed, the countless small and large ways I'd loved her every day of her life. "She is your daughter of heart," Caroline had written. "Blood doesn't matter." And suddenly, with perfect clarity, I knew she was right. Kendra was my daughter in every way that mattered. I had been there for her first steps, her first words, her first heartbreak. I had shaped her values, laughed at her jokes, held her when she cried. No DNA test could negate that history or diminish that bond. But before I could process this revelation fully, my phone rang. An unknown number that I almost ignored until some instinct made me answer. "Mr. Ellis," a professional-sounding woman's voice came through the speaker. "This is Nurse Jacobs from Hartford Memorial Hospital. I'm calling about Ruth Montgomery. She's been admitted following a severe diabetic episode." My grip tightened on the phone. "Is she all right?" "She's stabilized, but we'll need to keep her overnight for observation." The nurse paused. "The reason I'm calling is about Kendra Ellis. She's listed as Ms. Montgomery's niece. She's here alone and seems quite distressed. When we asked if there was someone we could call for her, she gave us your number. Kendra had asked for me. After everything, after the public humiliation and weeks of silence, when she needed someone, she'd asked for me. Tell her I'm on my way," I said, already reaching for my keys. Tell her her dad is coming." Hartford Memorial Hospital stood like a monolith against the night sky, its windows checkerboarding light and dark across the facade. I'd spent too many hours in this building, sitting beside Caroline through chemo treatments, pacing waiting rooms during Kendra's teenage appendectomy, and finally, holding my wife's hand as she slipped away 8 years ago. Hospitals have a way of marking life's most critical moments, becoming waypoints on the map of our existence. Tonight, as I hurried through the automatic doors into the harsh fluorescent lighting of the emergency department, I wondered what kind of waypoint this would become. The smell hit me immediately, that distinct blend of antiseptic, industrial cleaner, and human vulnerability that seems universal to all hospitals. A television mounted in the corner murmured a late-night talk show that no one was watching, its forced laughter creating an unsettling soundtrack for the quiet desperation filling the room. At the reception desk, a tired-looking woman with cropped gray hair looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" "I'm William Ellis. I was called about my sister-in-law, Ruth Montgomery. My daughter Kendra is here." She checked something on her screen, then nodded. Ms. Montgomery is in treatment room 14. Your daughter is in the family waiting area, down that hallway." She pointed toward a corridor branching off to the right. I thanked her and moved in that direction, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. What would I say to Kendra after everything? Should I mention the DNA test? Ruth's manipulations? The changed will? My mind raced through scenarios, rehearsing and discarding opening lines that all seemed inadequate for the weight of the moment. The family waiting room was one of those spaces designed to offer comfort but achieving only a sad approximation. Muted blue walls, chairs that weren't quite comfortable enough for long waits, outdated magazines fanned across coffee tables, a water cooler gurgling in the corner. And there, huddled in a chair by the window, was Kendra. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. Her usual careful appearance had been replaced by something hastily assembled, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, oversized sweatshirt hanging off one shoulder, no makeup revealing the freckles across her nose that she'd inherited from Caroline. She was staring out at the parking lot, arms wrapped around herself in that self-protective gesture I remembered from her childhood, when she'd feel overwhelmed or scared. I stood in the doorway, suddenly frozen. What right did I have to approach her after I'd written her out of my will, chosen a virtual stranger as my heir out of wounded pride? And yet, she'd asked for me. She'd given the nurse my number when she needed someone. Before I could move, she turned, sensing my presence the way she always had, even as a small child. That mysterious awareness that existed between us regardless, apparently, of DNA. Our eyes met across the room. Hers were red-rimmed and swollen, dark circles beneath them suggesting many sleepless nights. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, the gulf between us filled with hurt and misunderstanding and secrets. Then, something shifted in her expression, a softening, a recognition. She stood slowly, unfolding herself from the chair and took a single hesitant step toward me. "Dad?" Her voice was small, questioning, as if unsure I'd still answer to that name. That one word, Dad, broke something inside me, not in the shattering way of the past weeks, but like ice cracking in spring, releasing what had been frozen beneath. I crossed the room in 4 long strides, and then she was running toward me. We collided in the middle of the waiting room, her arms wrapping around my waist, face buried against my chest, the way she used to do as a little girl after a nightmare. I held her tightly, one hand cradling the back of her head, feeling her shoulders shake with silent sobs. "I'm here," I whispered into her hair. "I'm here, sweetheart." Time seemed suspended as we stood there, holding each other in that sterile hospital waiting room, beneath the buzzing fluorescent lights and the murmur of the unwatched television. It wasn't just a reconciliation, it was a recognition, a return to the truth of our relationship that transcended biology or betrayal. Eventually, her breathing steadied and she pulled back slightly, looking up at me with eyes so like Caroline's it made my heart ache. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice ragged. "I didn't know. I was confused. Aunt Ruth told me things that didn't make sense, but she had evidence and Shh, I soothed, brushing a tear from her cheek with my thumb. "We don't need to talk about all that right now." She shook her head fiercely. "No, we do. I need you to know I didn't mean those things I said online. I was angry and hurt, and Aunt Ruth kept saying you'd been lying to me my whole life about who your biological father is." I finished quietly. Her eyes widened. "You know, I found the DNA test that fell from your purse that day. I only opened it tonight after Emily gave me your note." I guided her back to the chairs, keeping my arm around her shoulders as we sat. "But Kendra, I need you to understand something. Biology doesn't make a father. Love does. Presence does. The thousands of days and nights I've spent loving you, worrying about you, being proud of you. That's what makes me your dad." Fresh tears welled in her eyes. "But why didn't you tell me? Why did I have to find out from Aunt Ruth?" I took a deep breath. "Because I didn't know." Her brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean, you didn't know? Your mother? She never told me." The words felt strange on my tongue, a truth I was still processing myself. We had tried for years to have a baby. There were complications, miscarriages. It was a dark time for us. I think I'm still piecing this together, but I think your mother was so desperate for a child, so afraid of another loss, that she took matters into her own hands. "So you never knew I wasn't—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Biologically mine? No. But Kendra, listen to me. I took her hands in mine, looking directly into her eyes. You are my daughter in every way that matters. Every memory we have together is real. Every moment I've loved you is real. DNA doesn't change that. She was quiet for a long moment, processing. Aunt Ruth made it sound like you and Mom had this huge secret that you'd been lying to me my whole life. She showed me the test results and said Mom had confided in her years ago that you weren't my real father. She said Mom was afraid of you, that's why she never told you the truth. Anger flared in my chest, not at Kendra, but at Ruth and her calculated cruelty. Your mother was never afraid of me. We had our problems, like any marriage, but there was always love and respect between us, Ruth. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Ruth has her own version of history. She's been twisting the truth since before you were born. I've been living with her since that day, Kendra admitted, shame coloring her voice. At first, she was so supportive, so understanding. But lately, she's been different. Controlling, angry if I mention you or question her stories. 2 days ago, I found Mom's old journal in Ruth's bedside table. She'd kept it all these years. What I read there, it didn't match what Ruth had been telling me. That's why you went to see Emily. She nodded. I needed to know if you were okay, if you hated me after what I did. And I needed to get away from Aunt Ruth for a while to think clearly. She glanced toward the hallway leading to the treatment rooms. When she collapsed tonight, I was actually packing my things to leave. I was going to call you tomorrow. A nurse appeared in the doorway then, clipboard in hand. Ms. Ellis, your aunt is stabilized now. She's asking for you. Kendra tensed beside me, her fingers tightening around mine. Is it okay if my father comes too? She asked, the deliberate emphasis on father not lost on me. The nurse nodded, and we followed her down the hallway toward Ruth's room. Before we reached the door, Kendra stopped, turning to face me. I need you to know something else, she said quietly. That DNA test doesn't change how I feel. You're my dad. You've always been my dad. I was confused and hurt, and I let Aunt Ruth manipulate that. But deep down, I've always known who my real father is. She took a deep breath. It's you. It's always been you. In that sterile hospital corridor, under humming fluorescent lights, with the distant sounds of medical equipment beeping in the background, I felt something broken begin to mend. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still hard conversations to have, trust to rebuild, a will to change back. But in that moment, I knew we would find our way back to each other. Because some bonds transcend biology. Some truths are stronger than secrets. And some love is unbreakable, even when tested by the cruelest deceptions. 3 months passed like a slow thaw after that night in the hospital. Spring arrived in Connecticut with a tentative beauty, daffodils pushing through half-frozen soil, tree branches heavy with buds not yet daring to fully bloom. Nature itself seemed to mirror our family's cautious healing process. Gradual, fragile, but persistent. Ruth had recovered physically from her diabetic episode, but something had shifted in her relationship with Kendra. The night at the hospital had forced a confrontation none of us had been prepared for. When we'd entered her room together, Kendra's hand firmly clasped in mine, Ruth's face had registered first shock, then a calculating anger that confirmed everything I'd suspected about her manipulations. What is he doing here? She demanded, her voice surprisingly strong for someone who'd just been stabilized. He's my father, Kendra had answered simply. My real father. What followed was an ugly scene. Ruth's carefully constructed narrative crumbling as Kendra confronted her with passages from Caroline's journal, with inconsistencies in her stories, with the timeline of events that didn't add up. Ruth had eventually retreated into stony silence, refusing to acknowledge either of us, turning her face to the wall in a theatrical display of martyrdom. We'd left her that way, Kendra collecting her essential belongings from Ruth's house the next day, while I waited in the car. She'd moved back into her old room in my house. Our house, temporarily, she'd said, just until she figured things out. That temporary arrangement had stretched from days into weeks and now into months. Neither of us quite ready to disrupt the delicate new balance we'd found. We'd established a routine that felt both familiar and entirely new. Coffee together in the mornings before she left for her marketing job in New Haven. Texts throughout the day. Mundane messages about dinner plans or reminders to pick up milk that carried the profound subtext of reconnection. Weekend projects around the house that often devolved into looking through old photo albums or watching movies we'd both seen a dozen times. We'd started therapy too, separately at first, then together. There were still difficult conversations, moments when pain would flare unexpectedly from some casual comment or memory. But we were talking, really talking, in a way we never had before, about Caroline and her choices, about Ruth and her betrayal, about the DNA test that had both divided and ultimately reunited us. "I think Mom was afraid," Kendra had said one evening as we sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies emerge in the twilight. "Not of you, but of losing you, of you thinking differently about me if you knew." I'd considered this, the swing creaking gently beneath us. She underestimated me, underestimated how much I loved both of you. "We all underestimate love sometimes," she'd replied with a wisdom that reminded me so much of Caroline it made my heart ache. Today was a milestone of sorts in our healing journey. A dinner I'd arranged with Emily Nielsen, the young nurse whose compassion had helped bridge the gap between Kendra and me. Since that night at the hospital, Emily had become something of a friend to both of us, stopping by after her shifts at Oakwood, bringing her famous apple muffins, offering a perspective that was both kind and objective when conversations between Kendra and me became too tangled in our shared history. I spent the afternoon preparing Caroline's lasagna recipe, the one she'd insisted contained a secret ingredient that was actually just an extra layer of cheese, and setting the dining room table with the good china we rarely used. Kendra had gone to pick up Emily, the two of them having formed their own unexpected friendship over the past months. As I laid out the silverware, I glanced at the secretary desk in the corner of the dining room where, earlier that day, I'd placed 3 sealed envelopes. Each bore a name written in my careful handwriting: Kendra, Emily, and one with both their names. Inside was the culmination of several private meetings with Martin Blake, a new will, my third in as many months, and one that I hoped would represent not just the distribution of material assets, but a philosophy about family and belonging that I'd come to embrace. The front door opened, bringing a rush of spring air and female laughter into the house. Kendra's voice called out, "Something smells amazing." "Just in time," I answered, moving to greet them in the hallway. Emily stood beside Kendra, a bottle of wine in one hand and a small bakery box in the other. "I brought dessert," she said, offering the box, "and a housewarming gift of sorts." "Housewarming?" I asked, confused. Kendra's eyes sparkled with excitement. "I was going to wait until after dinner to tell you, but I signed a lease today for an apartment in town just 3 blocks from here." She hurried to add, "It's not that I want to leave, Dad. It's just, you need your own space," I finished for her. "I understand, sweetheart. That's wonderful news." And I meant it. Her wanting to live nearby rather than returning to New Haven felt like its own kind of healing. A choice to remain close without dependence, to establish boundaries while maintaining connection. Dinner was relaxed, the conversation flowing easily among the 3 of us. Emily shared stories about her nursing school adventures. Kendra talked about a new project at work, and I found myself laughing more genuinely than I had in months. The pain of the past year hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something we could carry without being crushed by its weight. As I cleared the dinner plates and brought out coffee to accompany Emily's chocolate torte, I felt a curious sense of rightness settle over me. These 2 women, one my daughter regardless of biology, the other a kind stranger who'd become important to us both, represented something I hadn't expected to find again after Caroline's death. Family, chosen and created through love rather than obligation. "Before dessert," I said, retrieving the envelopes from the secretary desk, "I have something for both of you." I placed them on the table, suddenly nervous. "Kendra, you know that after what happened, I made changes to my will. Changes I'm not proud of that were made in anger and hurt." Kendra's expression fell slightly. "Dad, you don't have to." "Please," I interrupted gently. "Let me finish. Emily, I named you as my heir without your knowledge or consent. That wasn't fair to you, and it certainly wasn't fair to Kendra." Emily looked stunned. "You what?" "It was a mistake," I admitted. "One of many I've made, but today I'm trying to correct it." I gestured to the envelopes. "These contain copies of my new will. I'd like you both to open them." With hesitant fingers, they each broke the seals on their respective envelopes. I watched their expressions as they read, Kendra's eyes widening, Emily's mouth forming a small O of surprise. "Dad," Kendra whispered, looking up at me. "This says It says I've divided everything equally between you, I confirmed. Because Kendra, you will always be my daughter, my family, my legacy. And Emily, you showed extraordinary kindness to a broken old man when you had no reason to. You helped bring my daughter back to me. Some debts can never be repaid, but I want you to know that you will always have a place in this family we're rebuilding. Emily's eyes glistened with tears. Mr. Ellis, Will, I never expected. I didn't help for any reward. I know, I said simply. That's precisely why you deserve it. Kendra reached across the table, taking both our hands in hers. Open the third envelope, she said. The one with both your names. I did, revealing a single sheet of paper with a quote beautifully calligraphed in Kendra's artistic hand. The true inheritance is not what we leave in the bank. It's what we leave in the heart. Below it, she'd added, family isn't defined by blood, but by love, choice, and forgiveness. Something tightened in my chest as I recognized Caroline's words, passed down now through her daughter, our daughter, in a new form. It's for the wall, Kendra explained. I thought we could hang it in the living room as a reminder of what we've learned, of what Mom always knew. Later that evening, after Emily had gone, and Kendra had retired to her room to continue packing for her upcoming move, I sat alone on the porch, the same spot where I'd first seen that devastating live video that had started our ordeal. The night was clear, stars scattered across the Connecticut sky like diamonds on velvet. You were right, Caroline, I whispered to the night air. About everything. I could almost feel her presence beside me, her gentle wisdom that had always seen further than I could. She had known that love transcends biology, that family is created through daily acts of care and commitment, that some secrets are kept not out of malice but out of a flawed, human attempt to protect those we cherish most. The wind stirred the wind chimes she'd hung years ago, creating a melody that seemed to whisper back, our girl came home. And she had. Not to the same home we'd had before, that was impossible, but to a new one we were building together, more honest and perhaps even stronger for having been broken and remade. Some inheritances can't be quantified in wills or bank accounts. Some wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the capacity to love, to forgive, to begin again. And in that currency, despite everything, I found myself suddenly unexpectedly rich. They say blood is thicker than water, but I've learned that love is thicker than both. When my daughter publicly canceled me and I removed her from my will, I thought our story had ended. Instead, it was just beginning. A journey that taught me the true meaning of family isn't found in DNA tests or legal documents, but in the countless moments of love, sacrifice, and forgiveness we choose to give each other. What would you have done in my position? Would you have opened that envelope sooner? Would you have seen through Ruth's manipulation before it poisoned your relationship? Or would you, like me, have needed to lose everything before understanding what truly matters? The hardest lesson I learned was that sometimes those we love keep secrets not out of malice but out of fear. Fear of losing the very love they're trying to protect. As Caroline always said, the true inheritance is not what we leave in the bank, it's what we leave in the heart. My daughter and I are building a new relationship now, one based on truth rather than secrets. It's not perfect, but it's real. And that makes it infinitely more valuable than the $3 million that almost came between us. If this story touched your heart, please follow our channel for more stories of family, forgiveness, and finding truth in life's most painful moments. Like, share, and tell me in the comments, what secret have you kept to protect someone you love?